Hi folks, back in a Celica today, a new car which I'll do a video about next time I think, but the purpose of this video is to look at my first impressions of Brian, the Thunder Grey Celica that came before this one and was sadly written off by a drunk driver. It's not quite been concluded yet, but I've clearly got another vehicle and we're getting towards the end of it now, so hopefully it's resolved shortly and I can perhaps just go into a little bit more detail about what happened. But until then, right, some first impressions of a Celica. So I ran a Celica a number of years ago when they were relatively new for a short while and thought it was a pretty good daily. Since then I've done lots more with cars, got more into them, driven lots more cars, much better cars. So I've got a slightly different perspective now. So this will be sort of my first, how long did I have it? Probably a month or so before it was written off. The things that I thought about the car. It was completely standard when I bought it. I did do some things to it which I'll come to in this video or another one, and just tell you what I thought of it. So first impressions, when you first get in a Celica, the interior is very plasticky. It's got sort of quite hard plastics, but it's got quite a nice shape to it, where something like an EP3 feels a little bit, or quite a lot, sort of cheap and quite crap. This is, you know, it's budget stuff, but it gives quite a nice feel, and with the sloped windscreen and sort of wrapped around you a bit, it just helps it feel a little bit more, I wouldn't say premium, but kind of a bit more special. So I quite like it as a place to be. And sort of moving on from that, the car is quite well insulated. Something like a Clio 200 or an EP3, older cars, they quite often leave you quite exposed to road noise, wind noise. They rattle about quite a lot, whereas Celicas, they feel quite well insulated. In fact, when Will got into the car for the first time, he was like, "Wow, it's, you know, more of a car than I expected. You know, it does the whole comfortable daily driver thing better than you expect. If you sort of come at it with the sort of baseline of a Clio or something. So for sort of quite a cheap sporty car." It's relatively comfortable day to day and quite nicely insulated. It's quite a nice place to be, albeit it doesn't have a premium feel to it. Important stuff. So we're all drivers. We want to know how a car drives. And I consider this to be a bit of a driver's car, and an underrated one at that. Now, it's different to a Civic or a Clio, things like that, because they sort of trade in grip. And, you know, they go down a road really quickly and they engage you with the sort of the grip and the competence and a little bit of sparkle. This is a little bit different. It doesn't have that hard-edged grip. And so you're not hustling it down the road at sort of 9/10, like sort of typical hot hatch. Just throw it down the road really fast, nice benign characteristics, and the car will look after you. Just throw it down the road, and that's great fun. The CRX is a bit like that, whereas this is a more sort of a more fluid car. It likes to flow down the road and be guided down the road rather than hustled down the road, which is very nice. It's got light steering, but really nice steering. It's positive. It's quite a short rack. And the front end is absolutely lovely. A really great front end on this car, hugely underrated. This car steers very nicely indeed. And one of the standout characteristics there is when you release the brakes, the car doesn't feel like it shifts back and unloads the front. When you unload the brakes, you know, obviously if you just release the pedal from quite a hard stop to nothing at all, it'll probably do that. But if you drive it, you know, carefully and well, when you release the brake, the front end doesn't unload. It stays turned into the corner, which is a really nice characteristic and something that sort of set a benchmark for me for other cars. When I drive other cars now, I'm thinking, oh, does that behave quite as well as the Celica when you release the brakes? Really nice characteristic for the car. once you get to the apex and beyond the apex, it's nowhere near as good. It just wants to, even though the car doesn't have much torque, it just doesn't behave as well. Into the corner, fantastic. Out of the corner, it kind of just wants to push. On the throttle, it just understeers out. So the car would benefit hugely from an LSD. So for anyone out there, Celica, one of the most valuable mods. Having not driven one, with one, I can only imagine an MR2 LSD would take huge strides to improve it. But yeah, it's a very, very nice steer. It's engaging. You don't have to be going 10/10 to enjoy it, which I'm a bit old now, so I quite like going down a road at 7/10 and enjoying the drive. And this is a car that you can do that because the steering is nice, the response of the car is nice, the pedals are beautifully spaced and weighted for heel and toe. So it's a very enjoyable car to drive, not at 10/10, and to enjoy flowing down a road nicely. So for me, it works very well. The engine is, it's a good engine. It's interesting because it obviously revs through to 8.4, I think, and it's enjoyable to do so. It's very, very sweet and free revving. I don't think I've driven a car that's quite as free. S2000 obviously revs higher, but it doesn't feel quite as smooth getting there. It has parts of the rev range that feel a little bit harsh relative to this. I suppose what I would say is this feels like you're working it harder when you're right towards the top of the revs. It's perhaps in the mid-range of the revs with this car that it feels very, very easy and free revving, like it wants to go further. Now, criticism. The engine is very free revving, revs beautifully. I like the red line, I like the way it makes power at the top. One of my biggest criticisms of this car is that it makes kind of very little power until the high lift cam is engaged at 6.2, I think. So perhaps between about 4.5 and 6.2, it really suffers with lack of power. So 1.8, it's never going to set the world alight, but it really struggles before it comes on cam. And the drive, it sort of suffers as a result of that. You're sort of always waiting for it, especially if like me, you like to drive the car not at 10/10, and it's perhaps at odds. The engine and the gearbox are kind of at odds with the easy nature of the car and the way they want to be driven. Because if I want to just thread this down a road fairly comfortably, but want to do so at a bit of a pace, I've got to be in that narrow power band at the top. So whilst I'm not, demanding everything of the chassis, you have to kind of demand everything of the engine, especially that second to third shift. You've got to be at 8.4 at the limiter, and when you change, otherwise it falls out of T-Tech or whatever you call it. So yeah, for me, it's a combination of that lack of power between, say, 4.5 and 6, and the gearing of the car. The gearing's quite long. If you could buy a short final drive, you can, but they're very expensive. If you could buy one for sensible money, God, that would improve things. If you could get a nice cheap crown wheel and pinion, match it up with the MR2 LSD and stick it in, total cost £1,000, that would be transformative. What a difference that would make. Unfortunately, the crown wheels and pinions that you can get for them are very expensive, in excess of £1,000. And so that would make it quite an expensive change. So yeah, a bit of a negative. The engine is interesting. I really like the engine, but packaged with this sort of chassis and the characteristics of it, and the gearbox being long as it is, you're sort of always waiting for it, which is a bit of a shame. Brakes are a huge weakness. The brakes are terrible. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. I think it's probably a servo master cylinder issue. It's not an issue with the car that I bought, it's an issue with all of them, unfortunately, and they are just very, very poor brakes, and I think that affects the way that you drive the car. You have to be conservative with your braking and braking points, and it sort of, if you do try and throw it down the road, it's one of the key things in your mind is your braking point and your braking energy, you know, the force that you hit the pedal with, and you're thinking about braking more than anything else when you're driving the car very hard. So a big weakness, and not something that's terribly easy to address, whereby most cars you can put a set of fast road, I'd call them fast road pads in, sort of stop export. That's exactly what I did with Brian, and it didn't make that difference that I expected and wanted. The braking was still poor. So yeah, a bit of a weakness for these Celicas. The brakes aren't great. Weakness, seating position. You can probably see heads on the ceiling, and steering wheel. I've got the seat sort of ratcheted right up here. If I put it back to what I would normally have my seat, about there, you know, a little bit of room, maybe half an inch between my head and the ceiling there. But this is a more comfortable driving position for me, and as I like to be more sort of down inside the car, steering wheel's too far away. I like to have the steering wheel sort of here, a bit of a bend, so I can comfortably steer without issue, have the steering wheel quite close to me, but it's not adjustable, and it's in as it is in standard for my frame. It's impossible to find the right driving position, so it's quite compromised. It's like a Renault really. You need to put the seat back right up so that you can have the steering wheel at the right length, so that you can steer properly. But of course, bit of a problem there, so something to address. I've got quite a long torso. I'm not hugely tall, just over 6 foot, but I've got a long torso, and it means I sit quite high in the car. I've not got short arms though, so perhaps this is a car that's sort of built for the Japanese physique body, and not a normal sized English person. So yeah, I can address it. I will do in a future video. So yeah, seating position, ergonomics, not ideal. Brings me to another positive, ergonomics of course. Changing gear, it's a lovely gearbox, a lovely gear change. Very good indeed. S2000 stands out as the best. MX-5s are very good as well, and this is sort of, you know, in there just below the S2000. Very good box, nice weight to it, nice and close, and good throw. So yeah, I think that's what gives this car such an enjoyable feel on a decent road. You're not hammering down the road super fast, but the weight and the feel of everything is really nice. Perhaps the exception being the braking that isn't there. Not sure how to address that, but I'm sure I will do. Okay, how fast is it? The answer, respectfully, is not fast. It sort of gets on all right once you're in T-Tech, but you know, if you're used to fairly quick cars, it's not fast. Albeit, does it suffer hugely as a result? No, I don't think it does. If this car had another 100 horsepower, would it be a better car? For me, probably not. So probably no bad thing. Fuel economy, I think fuel economy is probably a little bit lower than I expected, albeit I do quite short trips, so sub 30 when it's probably pretty damn close, if not slightly lower than the M140i. And considering the M140 had north of 450 horsepower, that is progress for you. And shows just how the M140i shines in that daily driver capacity. So this is sort of very high 20s, which is a bit crap, but also anywhere around 30 miles per gallon is pretty okay for a driver's car. So that's what you've got. Right, another positive, practicality, a rather boring one, but it's got a tailgate. I pretty much have to have a tailgate for my daily driver. When I had the M4s, what a pain in the arse. It's just so good to be able to stick the tailgate up and then big stuff goes in the back, no problem at all. So for me, tailgate is a must. The boot is a good size, and it's for something that's a coupe shape, and quite swoopy. It's very practical, which suits me down to the ground. So I'm going to keep this video fairly short. Those are my first impressions of the car. Let me know if your opinions differ, if you've owned these cars for longer, if you've got sort of a bit more insight into how a relationship with the car matures over time, thoughts that you have, other things that you like or dislike about the car. Really interested to hear what you think, because of course people that have owned the cars have a greater affinity with them and sort of get a better feel for them. So yeah, my first impressions are, I've mentioned a few negatives there, but my first impressions, you know, I've bought another one. I actually really like them. I think they make for a really nice compromise between being a driver's car. It engages you, it's enjoyable to drive on a B road, and being relatively comfortable and enjoyable. So yeah, it's delivered on what I hoped it would. And so I think I'm going to end this video here, and then I'll perhaps just do another one, also fairly short, about the little improvements I made to Brian before he was written off, and what improvements it's made. Slightly as an aside, I've clearly bought another Celica. I will make a video about that shortly as well, letting you know what I bought and why I bought it. As well as that, Brian was written off. There is salvage that I will almost certainly be buying. I do not want to release it to the other insurers. And so we have another project kicking off using Brian's heart, the engine. So that is very exciting for us. A little bit of a silver lining with that one. And so there'll be a video about that shortly as well. We're obviously going to build an MR2 with that engine, so that will be awesome. So on that note, I'll leave it there. Please let me know what your thoughts are about these cars. Let me know if you have any thoughts about MR2 as well. And until the next time, stay safe and all the best.